Kia ora everyone, it's Nadine France here from Toitū Envirocare. Welcome to our webinar on product certification today. It's really great to see everyone here. Before we kick off on our speakers today, I just want to do a few notes of housekeeping. Firstly, welcome and thank you for attending today on, I don't know where everyone is today, but in Auckland it's a very gloomy day. So a good day to stay inside for a webinar. A few notes first, that if you do have any technical issues with Zoom, the best thing to do is to log off and log on again. That tends to resolve the vast majority of our problems. But if you do have any issues, we are recording this webinar, so it will be available after the event. We'll email that out to all the registration list, but also make it available through our website, toitū.Co.nz. We've got some fantastic speakers today, so we'll be going through our speakers first and then have the opportunity for Q&A at the end. Please do keep entering your questions through the question function at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll answer them all towards the end of the webinar. We'll be aiming to keep this webinar to about 45 to 50 minutes over your lunch break today. So if there are any questions that we don't get to, we will endeavour to get back to you following the webinar. So before I pass over to our first speaker, just a brief introduction to Toitū for those of you who don't know us. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research, the Crown Research Institute. We've been around since 2001, so I note in my slide I say we have over a decade of experience. It's almost 2 decades as of next year, which is really exciting, helping organisations achieve credible environmental certification. We are based in robust climate science, but we really believe in delivering business-friendly and accessible solutions to our clients throughout New Zealand, but we also do have clients in Australia, the UK, and a couple of other places as well. We're accredited to JASANS, which means that we are audited by the auditors and reach the standard of JASANS, but we're also members of the CLC, SBN and SBC. And we are also a B Corp, which means that we seek to balance the interest of our main stakeholders, as well as the interests of our workers, customers, communities, and most importantly, with the environment. So before I get started, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Nick Watts is the Technical Product Specialist at Toitū, who has worked most recently on the certification of Fonterra's Simply Milk product, which you'll be hearing about a bit more later. Nick spent his 20s teaching in New Zealand as well as Vietnam and Guatemala before realising that what he liked most was actually teaching about sustainability and the environment, and decided to make that his career. So Nick is our product specialist. He works across a range of different sectors and he enjoys the challenges and learnings that come with that. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and pass over to Nick Watts.
Thanks, Nadine. Just let me know when my screen comes through there.
Yep, we can see your screen, Nick.
Cool, and is my video working okay?
Yep, we can see you and your house.
Okay, great.
Lockdown.
Yep, so I've got about 10 minutes, so I'll take you guys very quickly through what we do here at Toitū in regards to our product lifecycle analysis. So yeah, this is me. I'm Nick and I'm a product specialist here at Toitū, and I studied lifecycle assessment with Massey University under Sarah McLaren. So we're going to have a little bit of a look at what is LCA, as well as an overview of the methodology. Have a look at LCA and Toitū. The claims that we do here around organisation and product, and have a very quick run through like our kind of broad process. And if we get time, we'll go through some questions as well. So what is LCA? LCA, or life cycle assessment, is a methodology for assessing environmental impacts associated with all the stages of the life cycle of a commercial product, process or service. And what this means when a client comes to us for a product claim is that they're asking us to analyse all the emissions that are associated with the life cycle of their product. We also help them to make a plan around reducing the impacts of that product or service, and also the option of providing carbon credits to offset the remaining emissions. So life cycle assessment has its roots way back in the 60s, and Coca-Cola, of all people, was one of the first kind of founders, I guess, of LCA. So they embarked on a study around the emissions associated with the raw materials and the energy use for a variety of their containers. So they calculated an estimate of the environmental burdens from those containers, and then made decisions based on that study about which ones to use. So this provided a bit of a foundation for LCA as it stands now, and it's now kind of backed up by decades of literature and you know, really powerful software and databases and things. So why LCA? Well, LCA provides a really comprehensive analysis of a product's inventory. It's also standardized, so we work to ISO standards, which gives reliability as well as transparency. We look really kind of far back into the life cycle of the product from what we call cradle to grave. So this could be things like the bauxite that's mined that goes into the aluminium that's used in your product, or the construction of a wind farm that contributes to the grid generation of the electricity that you use to manufacture your product. So from raw material extraction, we obviously look at the manufacturing and distribution processes, and these can be quite significant, before looking at things like use, which might be the refrigeration of your milk bottle or beer bottle, for example, and as well as disposal and recycling. So LCA practitioners have the capacity to look at a wide range of environmental impacts, and one of the kind of key initial drivers of LCA is to avoid solving one problem but creating another. So a good example of this is with biofuels. It's, you know, a great idea to be swapping out fossil fuels with biofuels to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but what LCA has shown is that there are some other impacts that are associated with the use of biofuels. So, you know, you might have a really kind of beautiful bar chart spit out that shows, you know, great, our climate change impacts have reduced, but you can have a look over at eutrophication and see that, you know, the eutrophication impacts have actually increased. So the aim of it is to try and provide decision makers with, you know, a really comprehensive understanding of the environmental impacts of your product or your service. We've got a pretty diverse range of clients at Toitū, so lots of consumable products, beer and milk and wine and water and cosmetics and things, as well as some electricity retailers. We've got an aluminium company, and things like printing services, as well as freight companies. Okay, so this diagram kind of aims to give you a bit of an idea about how the organization that is our client, kind of how their activities relate to the life cycle of their product. So you can see with this blue dotted line here, these are all the kind of activities or emission sources that are directly owned by the organization. Now, when we're looking at the life cycle of a product, we kind of get rid of that concept of ownership or operational control, and we look simply at, you know, what are the emissions that went into this product. So in the example of a winery, we'd start way back at the vineyard, and then we'd move on to looking at the emissions associated with the supply of grapes and all the freight involved there. When we get to the winery, we might encounter some really good data because, you know, the organization has ownership of a lot of, well, you know, of everything that is happening at this stage. But it could be that we then move on to some third-party distribution as well as use and end of life. So some companies may have a bit more ownership of their supply chain, for example. So milk is a good one where, you know, The farms may be independent, but the tankers are owned by the milk manufacturer and some of the distribution processes as well. So this makes it a little bit easier when looking at data. We may have more access to primary data and have a better capacity to model the emissions. So I thought we could go through very quickly kind of a broad view of what our process is. So where we start is that we create a product spec or a product specification. So this is like a rule book for us to build the model against. The product spec combines our program rules as well as internationally recognized life cycle rules for that product type. So it could be beer or milk or yogurt or you know, products at a high level like that. And the idea behind the product spec is that if all of these LCAs are built to, you know, analyze a certain product based on the same rule book, then we should be able to really compare them all quite reliably. The next step is to create the product model. So this is a software-built series of calculations, and these can be really quite straightforward or quite complex, depending on the nature of the, you know, the system that we're trying to analyze. So from time to time, we are approached by a client and they have done an existing LCA. So this is the approach that we took with Fonterra that Lara can tell you all about in a couple of minutes. But this was, you know, an example of quite a complex product system that involved, you know, a lot of animal emissions, methane and nitrous oxide emissions. So it was quite a neat way to work, having that partnership rather than us trying to reinvent the wheel there. The next step is to collect emissions data. So kind of sounds easy, but it can be a bit of a process in real life for the client and for us too. The data kind of influences the way that the model comes together. You know, an example of this is with distribution. So a company may have really, really good visibility over the product as it leaves the factory or the processing plant. But then when it gets to the distribution center, suddenly it's a little bit harder to track exactly where this product is going and how much volume and things. So this is where, you know, we have to work quite closely with the client to figure out what data that we can get from them and, you know, figure out if we need to build in any assumptions to estimate emissions where we can't see exactly what's going on. And you'll notice there are a couple of arrows there as well, and this just, you know, kind of tries to express that it's a bit of an iterative process and requires a bit of teamwork between us and the client to get this product model and the emissions data sitting correctly. Once we've got the LCA model or the product model all done, we require our clients to produce some documentation. So there's one document that summarizes the footprint and the inventory, and another that outlines the reduction plans that they plan to do. So this is the kind of real power of carbonzero, is this focus around reductions. It's great to be offsetting your emissions, but you know, it's really, the real power of it is in reducing those emissions in the first place. So it's a really important part of the process. So once we have our working product model and our documentation done, then we are ready for audit. So we use in-house verifiers who are really, really good at the job, and you know, any kind of data issues or model issues get found and brought back to us to fix. So they always find stuff, and we've had feedback from clients that this is a really valuable part of the process. So the last step is certification. This is something that our clients aren't typically involved in, but it involves you know, a tech review by a member of our senior leadership team. There's a really thorough look through of everything that the auditors have done to ensure that they've followed all the protocols correctly, and then finally our clients are issued a certification, and then at that point you're done for the year, and it's time to go and crack open your carbonzero beer or wine and have a bit of a celebration. So that's me. I think we're going to keep our questions until the end. Nadine, is that correct?
That's correct, Nick, but you've actually gone slightly under time. So I've got a couple of questions if you want to answer one now.
Yep.
James has asked, what common assumptions do you apply to understand the end-of-life impacts of a product?
So we use, we try and work to precedents as much as we can. So recycling is a good example where, you know, there is some methodology outlined by the ISO standards. We may find some literature that can give us some idea of, you know, how much chilled energy is required per square meter of, you know, refrigerator space or something like that. So we try to kind of work back to, you know, some literature to support what we're doing, and then we document all that so it's on record.
Brilliant. Anna's got a great one here about LCA and using it to improve the process. Anna, great question. I think I might leave that till the end, and so then we can actually get feedback from all our participants, because I think it's a really interesting one. So if you don't mind on that one, I'll leave that to the end, and then we can get all our panelists to answer. Great, thank you, Nick. Fantastic presentation.
All right.
So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and before I do that, just a reminder that we are answering questions at the end of this process. So please do keep sending through your questions, and we'll answer them at the end. I'd like to introduce our next speakers from Fonterra, Lara Phillips and Andy Miller. Lara is our Senior Manager of Sustainability Solutions at Fonterra. Her role is focused on creating shared value by developing solutions to meet customer and consumer needs about sustainability. Over the past 14 years, she's worked on climate policy and sustainability strategy across the agriculture, insurance and advisory sectors in New Zealand and Australia. And Andy is Fonterra's Technical Manager for on-farm research and development. His role is to lead Fonterra's research into on-farm practice to improve efficiency, sustainability and quality of milk production. Prior to joining Fonterra, he was the head of operations for Thiland Farm Group, a large multi-farm dairy operation, and held technical and business management roles in the animal health sector. So both Lara and Andy were involved in the launch of New Zealand's first carbon zero milk, Simply Milk, which came out last month, and are going to take us through the process, learnings and a bit of a case study on that. So thank you. Over to you, Lara and Andy.
Hi, thank you, Nadine. I shared my screen, but it looks like it's paused. Is that correct? Or are you seeing my screen?
I can see Fonterra case study, Simply Milk.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Great to be with you today while we're all working from home, most of us. So today I'd like to share with you a bit about our new product launch, Simply Milk, in partnership with Foodstuffs North Island, supported by Toitū Envirocare for the certification and AgriSearch for the LCA modeling. So Simply Milk was launched in July this year, so about a month ago, and is the first carbon zero milk in New Zealand and one of only a handful of carbon neutral dairy products in the world. I'll start by sharing a bit around the rationale for why we launched Simply Milk, how this fits into our strategy at Fonterra, and then I'll pass to Andy Miller, who will share with you what it took to achieve the Carbon Zero certification and the lessons that we've learned. First of all, how this fits into our strategy at Fonterra. So through a purpose and strategy refresh last year, sustainability is now at the heart of our strategy as an organization, and really with a strong focus on how this will help us to maximize value of New Zealand milk through innovation, sustainability, and efficiency. We rely at Fonterra on a range of ecosystem services, from how we farm the land to how we produce our products. And we know that our markets are increasingly seeking that we farm sustainably as well. And so we know that we need to connect our consumers and our markets to how we operate, and sustainability is really at the center of that. And within our strategy, lowering our footprint and really transitioning to a low emission future is a really key priority for us within that strategy. So how did we get, excuse me, so how does that fit into the context around why we decided to do Simply Milk itself? Well, first of all, we know, of course, that emission reduction in the food sector is critical, and that food production across the product life cycle globally represents around 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions from public reports. So after fossil fuels, food production is something that's really important in the emission reduction profile. And dairy, while it's around 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions, of course, we know in New Zealand that dairy represents a good proportion of New Zealand's emissions at around 25%. So we know that we have a really important role to play in reducing emissions and meeting New Zealand's Paris commitment targets.
Hi, Lara, it's just Nadine here. I think your slides may have frozen.
Oh,
better interrupt your flow because it works just
whereabouts am I? I'll just reshare.
Okay, that works. Sorry about that.
That's all right. So resume share. Oh, let's see. Has that come through?
Yep, that's perfect. It's working now.
All right. Okay, great. So So not only is it really important that we reduce emissions in the dairy sector, but we also know, of course, that it's really important for our customers as well as consumers, both here and overseas. And of course, at Fonterra, we export about 95% of our product. So our offshore customers and consumers are really important as well. And what we do know is from our global customers that our customers are taking on emission reduction targets anywhere from 30 to 50% reduction by 2030 and 2050, which now include their supply chain, which includes us. And then finally, of course, we know that consumers are aware of all of this context and very well aware of the climate crisis and are expecting their food suppliers and the companies that they buy products from to act on climate change as well. And so we know from Colmar Brunton research and a range of other global research that consumers are informing their purchasing decisions with sustainability and looking to make more sustainable choices, whether it's from reusable packaging to actions that they take in their diet. And of course, we know that the dairy consumers specifically are also seeking more information on sustainability. So we're very conscious of this, and it's really important that we respond to meet this customer and consumer need and play a role in the solution. And so a big part of our sustainability program is not only working with our customers, and like us, Foodstuffs North Island have been seeing changes in consumer patterns and increased interest in seeking solutions around sustainability. So we decided to work together with Foodstuffs on Simply Milk. So we see carbon zero as really one part of our climate plan and an important part of how we engage with consumers on sustainability, but really one part of a broader portfolio on how we act on climate change. So of course, across our supply chain, how we support our farmers to understand their emissions and take actions where they can to reduce them, how we work in our manufacturing to transition to net zero through renewable solutions such as biomass and other options, through our R&D and innovation pipeline. So we've been working on with a range of partners on trialing solutions for biological emissions. And so that's a really important part in how we're going to solve the challenge on farm. And then finally, how we connect to consumers on that and how we bring them a part of the solution as well, and how consumers can be a part of the solution through their everyday purchasing decisions. So what we do know is that given the urgency of emission reductions required based on the science, that and the reality of biological emissions on farm, that offsetting will play a role in helping to avoid unavoidable emissions today, or reduce unavoidable emissions today, and that's where we really see carbon zero fitting in. Ultimately, this is a suite of initiatives that add up to having a footprint that is aligned to a climate resilient future. We see carbon zero being a piece of that puzzle. So carbon zero is really about collaborating to deliver new solutions and connect to consumers on sustainability. So in collaboration with foodstuffs, we believe this is about providing more options and solutions to consumers and connect to issues that they care about. This is one small step and one way that we can show where we're heading and what we believe in, and help consumers get involved with us as part of that. And it's only been about 1 month since launch, so it's pretty early days for us with regards to the overall reception of the product so far in market, but it's been pretty positive so far, and we've seen good results so far with regards to consumers trading up from private labels. So far has been demonstrating that consumers are really seeing value in spending more on sustainability and buying products that align with that. So now I'll hand over to Andy to speak about how we achieved carbon zero.
All right, thanks, Lara, and I think you'll find I'm the other Lara Phillips for some reason. So hopefully you guys can see now a blank whiteboard on your screen.
Not yet on my end.
Oh, okay. All right, let's have a see.
Yep, I can see it there.
Can do.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so I'm just going to go quickly. I've got 5 minutes to go through a quick chalk and talk through the process, or outlining our LCA, and I guess just fleshing out the process that we went through on, taking it further from what Nick was talking about, what it looks like. There's quite a lot of challenges along the way, and a lot of that sort of sits with the complexity of the system, and particularly the complexity and the variation on farm. So with close to 10,000 suppliers and around about 4.5 million cows, and a lot of different ways of doing things, the on-farm footprint is quite challenging, and quite a learning curve, I think, for everyone involved in that. Really sort of looking at our farm systems, as Nick said, we have to look at the emissions from cows, what we put into growing crops and pasture, food that we bring in, the energy requirements of running the farm, and what comes out the back end of the cow, the effluent, and how we manage that. That all has an effect. Unfortunately, we have a long-standing relationship with Ag Research, who have been looking at Fonterra's on-farm footprint for the last 15 years. So they wrapped that into a broader LCA, and we also included, it was quite a cross-functional collaborative process across all of Fonterra, through transport, through processing. So we had 3 different processing plants involved, looking at our packaging. Our energy team were really important in that space, and then working out the emissions related to the distribution, and through to the foodstuff supermarket, and as mentioned before, what was the impact of end of life, right through to disposal of the packaging and cleaning of glassware, etc. And then finally looking at all the other things that go into the process, so that the emissions related to upstream production of raw materials and the energy we used. So primarily for us, that was electricity, the fossil fuels impact, and the impact of broad-in feeds and fertilizer onto farm. So a lot of data there in that space. So that sort of defines our system boundary, and quite a lot of goings on. So if I think about the learnings, a lot of it is about managing and with that data with a mind to verification and the audit process. The first thing I'd say is learnings for us was record everything, and it sounds like a no-brainer, but we had a situation where we had a couple of people that were key to the process and kicked it off at the start who moved on to another vocation during the project life, and so yeah, that was a good learning around making sure that all the data, all the raw data is accessible, that any assumptions that are made along the way are recorded, and what the rationale was, and who provides the information for every part of the process as you're going into the verification audits. And preparation for that audit should start like from the get-go. So as the LCA develops that question of how are we going to verify this piece of data, or what's the documentation that's needed, so that's built through the time. And similarly preparation for site visits, etc., is really important. As part of the certification, there's a requirement for us to provide our plan around managing and reducing emissions, and as you know, all those things that Lara said all pull into that, and primarily in two areas. Around 75% of our emissions, or of the footprint, comes from on-farm activity. So we're really focusing on delivering reports back to farmers, so individualized reports showing where there might be opportunities, looking at technological solutions to around methane in cows, and other ways to just improve general efficiency, so our output in terms of litres of product comes for less cost in terms of emissions. Similarly, in our transport and processing, looking for cleaner energy alternatives, and again, efficiencies in process. And finally, just want to touch on what we did in terms of our carbon credits. So the offsetting, we've got two pools of credits. So one is supporting reforestation of New Zealand native forests, so permanent forestry. We didn't want to be investing in commercial forestry, so that's a permanent sequestration, and also looking at offshore projects under the gold standard banner, so credits associated with supporting energy and environmental friendly projects in developing countries. So we've got supporting a project looking at supplying low emissions cooking stoves to people in Bangladesh, and a hydroelectric project in India. So quite exciting to see these tangible things that come out of the offsetting process. And just finally, I just want to thank the team at Toitū, who were awesome to work with, and you know, it was a shared journey of learning a lot along the way. So thanks very much to all involved, and enjoy some Simply Milk. Cheers.
Brilliant, thank you, Andy and Lara. Andy, I think you've single-handedly raised the bar on illustration use in a webinar, and I'll be insisting on everyone doing an illustration in a webinar from now on. That was really fantastic, thank you. Spectacular. So thank you to them both. I'm seeing questions coming through, which is great. As I said, we'll address all our questions at the end, but please keep firing them through. There are some great ones coming through. I'd also now just like to introduce our next speaker, Kat McDonald from Lion. Kat heads Lion sustainability efforts in New Zealand and overseas, and in her role she ensures that Lion sustainability initiatives are embedded and aligned in their long-term goals. Lion's 3 sustainability pillars focus around responsible consumption, ethical environmental production, and building strong and inclusive communities. And last year they launched New Zealand's first carbon zero beer, the Kiwi Pale Ale with the Fermentist. So really looking forward to hearing about this. So the Pale Ale was launched in about, was it October last year? So
yeah, you can hear me okay? It's all good?
Yeah, so you're a wee bit further down the process than Simply Milk, which was launched last month. So really looking forward to hearing kind of the learnings and how things have gone. Over to you, Kat.
Cool. So hi everyone. Yeah, lovely to hear the story as well that through Fonterra, and just to hear more businesses really kind of getting behind understanding the impacts of their products, and as Lara said, particularly in the food and manufacturing space. So we started to look at the Fermentist as somewhere we might want to look at applying certification, and particularly because the Fermentist was launched in 2018 as Lion's sort of sustainable microbrewery, and it was, the idea behind it was a place for us to test and learn and to get ideas and scale up basically. And that's actually quite important because, you know, as you would have heard from Andy, the sort of, it's quite daunting to look at some of the really big stuff in your business and go, where do we start? And when you've got something like the Fermentist, you can go, well, actually, why don't we start there and learn, and then we can kind of, you know, move into building that into the organization. So that's sort of what we did. And the other reason for us why, very similar to Lara and the team, we've got at Lion, you know, science-based targets to meet around carbon reduction. Karen are currently looking at aligning that with a 1.5 degree target, and we had it set at a 2 degree target. So we've had you know, climate related goals. We've got the RE100, which is looking at having all of our electricity in the business being generated through renewable sources, and we've also got things like the Climate Leaders Coalition. So we had all of these things we were doing, and we just thought, what's a tangible way to sort of start bringing this stuff to life? And for us, the Fermentist felt like the right place to look at it. So, you know, we'd already been doing some really good stuff. And the other thing about it is, you know, it's hard to kind of, I guess, verify and take credibility for some of the good work you're doing when you just don't have the data or the measurement to show for it. So we took the Fermentist on a journey of, look, what gets, you know, measured gets managed. And so let's actually have a look at all the initiatives they put in place when they opened that, which was around solar and, you know, on-site gardens and making sure they compost grain, and, you know, all through their process they had already identified that sustainability would be at the heart of decision making. So we, you know, applying a product footprint approach and going from that kind of cradle to grave, sort of looking at what the impacts are across the life cycle, would actually give them two things. It would give them some ability to go, well, did they actually, you know, all those things have an impact, but also where can we look for more opportunities to reduce our footprint over time. And we decided, so I think it was actually when we launched the Kiwi Pale Ale, we thought, let's just start with one beer. Like, that kind of simplifies it because there is a lot of data you need to collect. But if we start with one product, we can just get a sense of what it takes to kind of pull all that data together, and then also start to get a sense of where are the emissions coming up for us in that product. So we looked at the Kiwi Pale Ale. As I say, the process with Toitū is really useful because they sort of give essentially a spreadsheet that really guides you in terms of where to look for information. You start pretty early on realizing that there's gaps and you don't know what you don't know. So you start having to look at, how do you close those gaps? How do you get estimates? How do you build assumptions that they're realistic? And then over time, how do you get better and better with the quality of the data that you actually do have access to? So we sort of started from a place where we recognised we had really good information about the actual production itself, all the things that were within our control, and maybe we had to do a bit more work around some of these other things in terms of working with suppliers. That in and of itself is also quite useful because you're starting to have conversations with suppliers then, and the Fermenters, because they were very deliberate in terms of who they chose to work with, they already had identified that they wanted to work with suppliers who were also looking at and building sustainability and embedding sustainability into their practices. So the conversation there was quite useful because they're saying, like, hey, now we're going to start actually measuring and accounting for this stuff. What information do you have? And that kind of got some of their suppliers interested in what we were doing here and potentially looking at, well, hang on, could we actually look at something like this for ourselves? So those conversations are ongoing as well. That's, I think, the beauty of the product footprint is you're actually sort of going beyond your own kind of boundary and actually starting these conversations both down and upstream. So what we kind of came up with is this Kiwi Pale Ale. We recognised that, interestingly, for the Fermentist, most of the kind of impact was really around the raw ingredients and the production, and not as much in distribution, which we probably would expect to see differently if we were looking at one of the bigger brands. But also what it means is that gave us a little bit of a foundation. So we now know, and they've actually gone on, the fermenters have gone on to then, once we did it once, we realised it's actually not that difficult for us now to put all the other products in their brand portfolio through, including their cider, which is a slightly different model, obviously, but you know, running through their portfolio and putting the rest of them through. What I think is quite useful once you've got this kind of framework is you can use it for decision making. So the Fermenters was a new brand, and they are building that brand. They will scale up the production, no doubt, of their products over time. And so when they look at that and they start thinking, well, where do we need to do bottling, or how are we going to go and distribute, you know, more of our products? They actually starting to have that question of what's the impact of that going to be on our footprint. So you're starting to kind of embed the thinking of emissions into decision making around growing and scaling of the product, which is another really valuable output. And the other thing is, it's been really, really useful as an engagement tool for people within the business. And I think, you know, a lot of the people that came to work at the Fermenters, they actually really, as part of that recruitment process even, they embedded in there the idea that this is a sustainable brand. We really want this to be a brand with purpose, and they recruited people that really believed and aligned with that. So we were able to help upskill people and really build capability within the business by not only talking to the people that are actually on site down at the Fermenters, in the brew house and in the tap room, but all of the people that are going to be out there in market talking to customers, telling them about why this is, you know, important for us, carbon zero, what it actually means, what is offsetting. And so it's, you know, enabled us, it's given us a tool to actually engage better with our people and explain to them some of the stuff we're doing. And some of it was just, you know, using simple infographics, looking at how we can engage, as I said, the sales team around why we're doing this and what's important. And I think that was actually something that we didn't necessarily think was going to have such an impact. But when I was visiting the Fermenters just before we went back into lockdown, actually, so I was actually down there when we went into lockdown, but I was visiting them, and they were doing another piece of work now. They're looking at a broader business benchmark for sustainability, so just beyond just carbon. And all of the project team were down there. I mean, all of the site team were down there, and in the hospitality and the tap room, they were saying that virtually everyone that started, I think all of them are basically all still there 2 years on. And in hospitality, that's quite, you know, unusual, because it's quite a high turnover sort of space, but they all really believe in what the Fermenter stands for. So it just drove home to me that, you know, having something like this, having something credible, it really can be a tool of engagement as well for your people. And then we also looked at the piece around consumers. So we kind of recognised that, I guess, you know, carbon and climate, it's all very out there. It's kind of difficult to really get people to quite understand exactly what we're talking about. And so we wanted to do something a little bit different with the Fermenters. We used a tool called ASMR. If you don't know what that is Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response. So essentially it's the idea that when you hear a noise or see something visual, you have a sensory experience of it. You might get goosebumps or something. Like, I mean, a bad example would be like nails on a chalkboard, or something that actually kind of gives you a visceral experience. So we ended up filming the process of basically a bottle of beer from the grains right through to it going through and being drunk. And we kind of did all that with these, it was all done with audio and video and all that stuff, just so that when the consumers saw it, it really took home for them the fact that all of those inputs, everything that's happened along the way, and the transport, and where it goes right through to those offset credits, which for the Fermenters is at Hiniwai Reserve, which was important for them to have somewhere local, and that happened to be in Banks Peninsula, so they were really lucky to get in some really great credits there of native regenerative forestry. And so, yeah, we were able to show the consumer that entire journey. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about an offsetting a product. And then in terms of some of the I guess outcomes now, because we have had it in market and all of the portfolio, I think we had the KPA was out in the Kiwi Pale Ale was done in 2018, I think, and we've had all the rest of the portfolio done since last year. And the impact of that was that we immediately had customers, some of our big customers, coming to us and saying, we want that product. We want a carbon zero product. So the likes of Air New Zealand, the likes of Sky City. I mean, so much has changed since COVID. But interestingly, talking to the team today, they said they've actually found that post-COVID, they've noticed their numbers getting better because of the fact that people are much more aware now of local, buying local, wanting to do the right thing. And so they're actually seeing like the impact of COVID hasn't necessarily been so negative on them. But we did notice that there was the pickup from customers, there was the interest in it in terms of people wanting to share the story, and then the people engagement piece as well around our own people in the organisation really liking that we were actually doing what we said we're setting out to do. So yeah, I don't know if I've got much time left, Nadine, but I can probably leave it there.
No, either way, if you want to keep talking is fine. Otherwise, we'll go and move on to questions, whatever you're comfortable with.
We can move on to questions, I think.
Okay. Well, this is actually a really great one from Anna, which I think will be sort of relates to what you've spoken to now, is will the LCA be used to improve the process and not just the product itself?
Do you want me to have a go at that one?
Yeah, and also Lara or Andy, if you want to respond as well, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that we really noticed is it starts to really hone you in on, as I say, first of all, what you don't know, and you start to really identify where there's gaps, and then that can help you close out risks and or look at, decision making, how you might do something differently because you can now see the full, understand the full impact. There's certainly been things that the fermenters have done, have probably changed or adapted based on looking at that product footprint. And I think that's sort of where you start to see the value of it. And even something as simple as, we didn't realise, for example, that if you compost the grain, because a lot of the grain from the big manufacturing sites goes as animal feed, but if you compost the grain, you have to account for, but you don't have to offset the emissions from it. So decision making, like what choices you make in terms of what you do with your waste products and all of that can have an impact in terms of what the cost of the offsets might be. And I think once you start costing carbon into the business, you do start to make decisions, around that.
Fantastic. Lara or Andy, do you want to weigh in on that at all about what it may have revealed to you about process? I know your emissions profile is a little bit different, but in terms of what you can influence in there.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's what Kat said. Like you manage what you measure. And it's been interesting going through this process and seeing it end to end and having some real visibility. We've been looking at our on-farm footprint for a long time, and that's been really instrumental in informing us what the opportunities are to improve that. But then putting it in context of the whole life cycle and the impact on product and having a price on the emissions, even for just a small part of the production, makes it quite tangible and feedback that can for the business and for our suppliers, for our farmer suppliers. So I think it's it's all part of an ongoing sort of process, and we're hoping that we're buying less credits as time goes on. So yeah, definitely a driver.
Oh, you're on mute, Nadine.
Sorry, that happens a lot. Thank you both. I knew that would happen at some point during this. We've got so far. This is one possibly for you, Lara, but it was about splitting the emissions, the offsetting between several schemes. What the thinking was behind that.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I think really at the heart of our decision around that is that climate change is a global challenge, and we can't solve climate change just with afforestation or just with renewable energy projects. We actually need all those solutions. And for Fonterra, about 95% of our product goes offshore, and we know that our offshore customers actually really want to support projects in their communities as well. And so for us, it's really around what's the right solution and what are the right projects to support in New Zealand. And absolutely, native forest regeneration on marginal hill country on unproductive land is absolutely the right type of projects to support here in New Zealand. We do know that there's a conversation in New Zealand at the moment, and there is a concern about the impact of large-scale forestry on rural communities, and of course, as food producers here at Fonterra were very well aware of that. So really our decision was around, we only want to procure credits from native forest regeneration on marginal land. So that does limit our options a bit. And so really, given the scale of our business and the type of customers that we have both in New Zealand and offshore, it was really about making a decision where we can support a range of solutions and really have a portfolio that represents that. Brilliant,
thank you. There was one that actually Nick and I discussed earlier today, which was about what you thought, and I'll put this to both, all three of you, what was the biggest challenge overall when going through this process? If there was one thing that you would pass on as a, I'm aware that we've got about 50 minutes, so, and we've got a couple of questions which I'll go back to, we'll go back to privately because we'll need a bit more info. But what the biggest learning is that you could pass on to everyone today?
I would say for us, it's really about getting the right project team together for that data piece. I mean, the bulk of it is around, you know, getting that information, and you have different people in the organisation that are dealing with procurement, for example, and working with suppliers. You might have different people in the organisation that are on site, that are doing all the on-site stuff. So what I found the most valuable is that when you get the right people together and you can get the tools, and then it actually starts to be much more streamlined in terms of that data collection. And yeah, that's definitely been the biggest challenge as well, is suddenly recognizing that, yeah, you get so far down the track with it, especially with product, because you're looking across the whole life cycle, and then there's just a part that you don't know, and you're sort of having to look at what assumptions you make, and having the right people to be able to help with that process as well has been really useful.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say probably for myself, really around, I guess, the holistic business case for doing something like this. I'd say this was perhaps something that was, quite outside something we've ever done before. And really for us, I think it's around how can we sort of tangibly start doing more and connecting to the New Zealand public and our consumers on that. And so recognizing that there's a whole suite of things that are going on within the organization, and this is sort of only one part of it, but a really important part for us around continuing to engage with our communities on solutions. And so really looking at the broader business case for why you do these types of initiatives, and bringing in different parts of the organization in order to get these sorts of projects over the line.
Mm. And actually the questions just come through which slightly relates to that, which is around, has COVID made it more challenging to make the business case for these sustainable products, given that, economically for some people it's been more challenging, and so, sustainable products, for better or worse, can be perceived as being, more expensive, or you have to pay a little bit extra. Has that had any impact at all on your sort of business case making or decision making around that?
I think it's quite interesting. I heard someone say the other day, there's no vaccine for climate change. Like, these issues don't go away. And I think I've been really, really pleased to see our business recognise that we've still got to get on and make an impact and do these things. What we are now looking at really carefully is how do we measure, how do we actually start looking at the value of some of this stuff and really tapping into the consumer insights? Like, what do we actually see if we put out in the market a brand that's carbonzero certified? Do we see an impact in terms of uptake of that brand, consumer sentiment, all of that stuff? So we're looking at how we can do that a little bit more effectively now, is really measure and understand that the commercial value, because we do think it's there, and it's just about really being able to tell that story and knowing that, we've still got to address climate change. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's made an impact really on the commitment to the direction of travel. I think in fact the COVID outbreak has, from an exporter of primary produce point of view, has actually strengthened, or our response and our situation for COVID has strengthened our position in terms of food safety and quality in general, even though it's not directly related. And so, the importance of supporting that with good sustainable practices and initiatives is still really important. So.
Fantastic.
And we sort of launched, well, we had to delay the launch how many months, Lara, because of the outbreak, but we're still seeing a really positive response in store. So
I know it's the new normal now, isn't it? So we while we sort of think about it in terms of what's happened this year, I guess with something like climate change, we will always have these things cropping up. So it's a matter of resilience and continuing. We've got a couple of questions which I think we've run out of time for. So Emma and Louise, I will endeavour to get your info and go back to you personally on those ones. And I'd like to very much thank all our panellists today. This has been a really, really interesting discussion and sparked a huge amount of chat. So that's been fantastic. So thank you to Nick, Lara, Andy and Kat for your time today. Really excited to see what happens over the next year. I think that we can clearly see that there's consumer demand for carbon zero products and kind of leadership. So, you know, congratulations on all your amazing work and look forward to where we go next.